In a closely watched speech on the Gaza war, U.S. President Joe Biden laid out the Israeli-approved proposal for a hostage ceasefire deal and urged Hamas to accept it. The Prime Minister's office cautioned that there was no change in Israeli positions, while right-wing coalition partners threatened to leave the government if the plan became policy. ILTV's Steve Leibowitz has more.
According to President Biden, the deal on the table brings all of the hostages home, ensures Israel's security, creates a better day after in Gaza without Hamas in power, and sets the stage for a political settlement with a better future for Israelis and Palestinians alike.
Now, after intensive diplomacy carried out by my team, my many conversations with leaders of Israel, Qatar, and Egypt, and other Middle Eastern countries, Israel has offered a comprehensive new proposal.
Biden defended Israel's right to self-defense and to bring Hamas leaders to justice. The president also claimed that Hamas has been largely defeated and that the time had come to implement a plan for post-war Gaza.
At this point, Hamas no longer is capable of carrying out another October 7th, which is one of Israel's main objectives in this war. Well, I've urged the leadership in Israel to stand behind this deal, despite whatever pressure comes.
Biden said there is potential for a better future if an agreement is reached.
Israel could be part of a regional security network to counter the threat posed by Iran. All this progress would make Israel more secure, with Israeli families no longer living in the shadow of a terrorist attack. And all this would create the conditions for a different future, a better future for the Palestinian people. One of self-determination, dignity, security, and freedom.
The Prime Minister's office responded with a statement saying Israel's conditions for ending the war have not changed. The destruction of Hamas's military and governing capabilities, the freeing of all hostages, and ensuring that Gaza no longer poses a threat to Israel. Under the proposal, Israel will continue to insist these conditions are met before a permanent ceasefire is put in place. The notion that Israel would agree to a permanent ceasefire before these conditions are fulfilled is a non-starter. Finance Minister Smotrich and National Security Minister Ben Gvir both issued warnings that if the plan presented by Biden is accepted as policy, they will not remain in the government.
Despite political tensions, the United States Congress has officially invited Prime Minister Netanyahu to address the U.S. Congress. Let's hear the full story.
On Saturday, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu accepted a bipartisan invitation to address the U.S. Congress. The invitation comes after weeks of discussion within the U.S. Congress and hotly contested debates over Israel's handling of the Gaza war. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer initially opposed the invitation, having criticized Netanyahu, even urging elections to replace him in Israel. But after further discussions, Schumer agreed to the invitation under the condition it was bipartisan. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell all signed the letter inviting Netanyahu to address the Congress. In response to the invitation, Prime Minister Netanyahu stated he was excited for the privilege to present in front of the representatives of the American people and the entire world the truth about our just war and those who wish to kill us. This week, Netanyahu also expressed his dismay with the United States and their failure, thus far, to sanction the ICC, which recently announced they intend to seek arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant over the Gaza war, a move the United States harshly condemned.
Because there was a bipartisan consensus just a few days ago that said that there would be a bill on sanctions on the ICC if they persist in these warrants. Now, you say there's a question mark. And frankly, I'm surprised and disappointed because I think it's to the detriment not only of Israel's interest, I think it's to the detriment of America's interest because Israel may be attacked first by the ICC, but you're next. America's really the target.
While a final date for the address has not been announced yet, it is expected to take place after the U.S. Congress's August recess.
Following the invitation of Netanyahu to address U.S. Congress and the announcement of Biden's plan to end the war, critics and supporters are awaiting a formal response from Hamas. Here to discuss the plan and its feasibility is Ari Haro, former Chief of Staff of the Prime Minister's office. Ari, thank you for joining us. Now, just following Biden's speech, Israeli government officials have threatened to leave the government if such a deal is implemented. Now, let's say that Israel rejects this plan and Hamas accepts. What will that mean for Israel in the international arena?
So I think that there's going to be, what this ultimately comes down to for Israel is two very concrete and sometimes conflicting war goals. One of them is to bring the hostages home, every single one of them, as quickly as possible. And the second stated goal is to bring to the end of Hamas as a political and terrorist entity in Gaza. Now, if a deal forces Israel to choose the former and dismiss the latter, then that is a situation that the government of Israel will have a very difficult time passing. But rather, if what Israel can do is bring about the former, meaning releasing the hostages and postponing the latter, even for an extended period of time, whether it's 6 weeks or 6 months, but with the promise that ultimately that goal of the war will take place, then that is something that I believe can pass in the Israeli government. But there's no question that if we find ourselves in a reality where Hamas accepts something and Israel doesn't, it will be damaging internationally. One thing that I will remind you and the viewers is that up until this point, Hamas has shot down every single offer that has come its way. Israel has been very active and very willing to take chances and to pay a heavy price to bring back the hostages. So it would be shocking to see a reality whereby Hamas accepts and Israel does not.
Now, why has there been no discussion whatsoever in the international community about Hamas surrendering or implementation of an alternative power in Gaza if this is the major sticking point for Israel?
It's definitely one of the failures, be it of the international community, and to a certain degree, even our own government's failure in conveying such a message that we are dealing with a murderous, terrorist, rapist organization that cannot be left with any type of sovereignty, any type of power, any type of ability to enact another October 7th. And this is a threat not just to the state of Israel and the residents of Israel. This is a theological, ideological movement that is hell-bent on destroying everything that we in the West hold dear. And one of the vast goals that should have been adopted by the international community is bringing about a better future for the innocent civilians of Gaza, means that you need to guarantee that Hamas, the terrorist entity, is removed forever. And there's no question that if we reach some type of arrangement here that allows us to bring back the hostages, it is imperative upon the state of Israel, and it is imperative upon the Western world to make sure that Hamas cannot survive beyond the end of this war.
All right, former Chief of Staff of the Prime Minister's office, Ari Haro, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
In light of the proposed new deal that could significantly change the reality of the war for Israelis, ILTV's Rachel Safdie went to Tel Aviv to gather public opinion. Let's take a look.
Many Israelis watched President Joe Biden's speech on the new proposed deal, and there are many differing opinions. So I'm here today in the streets of Tel Aviv to ask Israelis what they think about the speech, the deal, and what they think Israel should do.
I think first and foremost it was incredibly disrespectful that it came out on a Friday night, understanding that it's Shabbat here and that the Israeli people and that Netanyahu wouldn't be able to respond for a full 24 hours. So first and foremost, I think that sends a message. Secondly, I think it's incredibly complicated. I think that given that the hostages are still there, any deal that we can grab onto that is actually going to release them is an important deal for us to consider and for us to move forward with. But at the same time, a deal that leaves Hamas in charge is no deal, because we're just going to repeat what happened October 7th over and over again until they're gone. So it's wildly complicated, and I don't envy the position of the governments, and the decisions that they have to make.
I think it's a very complex situation and a very complex deal, but I'm hope for peace and whatever it brings to bring the hostages home.
What do you think of this new deal? Should Israel accept it?
Not on such conditions, because I believe that it's the most priority for us to bring our people back home. But we can't just let Hamas go and tell him, like, it's bargain. They push and push and push, and then we take all conditions what they want. It's impossible, because it will be the new war, it will be the new kidnapping of people, and it will be endless. So it's a very, very difficult choice, but I believe that it should be other options.
I think that Hamas can't be in power ever, and that we got to bring the hostages home. So something that accomplishes both of those goals is the only way to end this.
What did you think of President Joe Biden's speech?
I think he has a moral duty. We have a moral duty as a country to bring back these people that were kidnapped from their own beds and their own homes on October 7th. They didn't do anything wrong. They're held there in the worst conditions, and I think they have to come back at any cost right now. We anyways, in my opinion, lost the war. Militarily, we kind of defeated them. PR-wise, we completely failed, and we just need to cut our losses and bring these people back home and move onwards with our lives.
So you think Israel should accept this deal?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, day 240 of the war in Gaza, targeted operations are continuing in the Philadelphia corridor and in the Rafah area. The 3-week-long IDF operation in Jabalia was completed and troops were withdrawn. More from ILTV's Steve Leibowitz.
The slow-moving operation is continuing in Rafah and surroundings. Since the beginning of operations in the Rafah area, troops have located and dismantled numerous tunnel entrances and underground infrastructure used by Hamas. In addition, 5 soldiers located 5 rocket launchers loaded and aimed toward Israeli territory, tunnel shafts, and caches of weapons used by Hamas.
ומוצאים מנהרות הברחה ומנהרות שמאפשרות לארגון החמאס להביא אמצעים ויכולות שעלולים לפגוע בכוחותינו ובאזרחינו.
During these operations, troops encountered and eliminated terrorist cells. The IDF is maintaining operational control of the entire 14-kilometer-long Philadelphia axis. Dozens of rocket launchers and at least 20 cross-border tunnels have been discovered and destroyed along the route.
The corridor has been the Hamas lifeline. It has kept Hamas alive with their smuggled deadly weapons. We have already eliminated around 300 terrorists in Rafah in this operation so far.
The IDF announced the completion of its 3-week operation in Jabalia. Forces in Jabalia recovered the bodies of 7 hostages, destroyed more than 10 kilometers of tunnels, and killed more than 500 terrorists in intense close-quarter combat. The IDF said that Hamas had turned Jabalia's civilian infrastructure into a fortified combat complex and opened fire at troops from schools and other sites where civilians were sheltering and built tunnel networks under civilian buildings. Meanwhile, amid the fighting, Hamas published a new propaganda video featuring the voice of Israeli hostage Noah Argamani, in which she urges the country to bring about her release after what she said had been over 237 days in captivity. The date that the recording was made could not be verified.
The Hezbollah bombardments in the north are ongoing, and for the first time since April, the coastal city of Akko was targeted. Amid the fighting, the U.S. Special Envoy says there could be a phased de-escalation in the north. ILTV's William Sharon has more.
3 people were lightly hurt following a rocket barrage on the Upper Galilee, as the Iron Dome air defense system intercepted multiple projectiles launched from Lebanon. The north took a pounding over the weekend, with Hezbollah firing dozens of rockets and drones towards Israel, with most intercepted. A drone launched from Lebanon that entered Israeli airspace was shot down over the northern coastal city of Akko. The northern city was targeted twice this weekend, after not being targeted by Hezbollah since April. The IDF said it carried out a strike against a building used by Hezbollah in southern Lebanon's Nakora after identifying a terror cell there. Fighter jets struck the building overnight used by the Iran-backed terror group in southern Lebanon. Meanwhile, A U.S. senior mediator said that the land border agreement between Israel and Lebanon, implemented in phases, could dampen the simmering and deadly conflict on the northern border. Biden's advisor, Amos Hochstein, said that the first phase would allow for tens of thousands of displaced residents of the northern communities in Israel to return to their homes, along with those living in the southern communities in Lebanon. Israel has expressed openness to a diplomatic solution to the conflict, but has said it will launch an all-out war against Hezbollah to restore security to the north if an agreement isn't reached. Hochstein says the final stage will include the demarcation of the first recognized border between Israel and Lebanon that could calm the tension.
The World Health Organization approved a resolution granting the Palestinian Authority all the rights of WHO member states, except for voting, while also appointing Israel to a new 3-year term on the World Health Organization Executive Board. During the debates, an amendment from Israel condemning Hamas and calling for the release of hostages was added to a motion originally aimed at condemning Israel's actions in Gaza. For more on that, ILTV's Mayan Hoffman.
The World Health Organization broadly approved a resolution that grants the Palestinian Authority all the rights of WHO member states short of voting. The resolution on aligning Palestine's status in the WHO with its newly elevated status in the UN General Assembly was approved Friday by a vote of 101 in favor, 5 against, and 21 abstaining. Interestingly, on the same day that the vote to enhance Palestine's status took place, Israel was appointed to a new 3-year term on the WHO Executive Board. This appointment came after Israel was nominated by WHO member states from the European region. Despite protests and objections from critics and rival member states, the Health Assembly chose to follow protocol and uphold the decision. Over nearly 72 hours of debate, discussions focused on 2 resolutions and 4 competing amendments regarding the situation in Gaza. One motion, led by Algeria and a group of Arab allies, aimed to condemn Israel's wanton destruction in Gaza. However, an amendment from Israel calling for Hamas to release the remaining hostages and condemning the terrorists for hijacking the area's health facilities was passed and added to the resolution. A second resolution approved by consensus at WHO's executive board meeting in December called for a humanitarian ceasefire, but failed to mention the hostages. Both resolutions passed with large majorities. However, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations in Geneva, Meirav Elon Shachar, condemned elevating the status of the Palestinian Authority.
Not a single Palestinian leader, not one, has condemned the October 7 massacre, the slaughter of families, the sexual violence, mutilation and torture of men, women and children, burning families alive, burning babies alive, and taking the hostages. What we have heard instead is justification and denial. The Palestinian delegation and all those who will support it today may pat themselves on the back for this World Health Assembly decision today, but in reality, until the Palestinians' leadership offers their people a true alternative rather than supporting Hamas, the symbolic gesture in these UN fora will do little to better the lives of Palestinians.
Well, joining us now to discuss the recent events in the United Nations is the Israeli ambassador to the UN in Geneva, Meirav Elon Shachar. Ambassador Shachar, thank you so much for being with us today. To start, this recent resolution with the amendment that was passed calling for the release of hostages, how did the Arab states who had proposed this initially react to this, given their goal was once again to single out Israel?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Indeed, it took them by surprise. Happened on Wednesday. We were successful in amending their own resolution with a call to the immediate release of all hostages, with denunciation of the militarization of all hospitals in Gaza and the ambulances by the armed group, by Hamas and Islamic Jihad. So this was very successful. It took them by surprise. And then the Egyptian ambassador, as head of the Arab group, actually his initial reaction was to withdraw their own resolution. That's what he wanted initially to do.
It's outrageous, absolutely outrageous. I mean, is this the norm for Israel in the United Nations? And how focused has the UN been on Israel during this war? And how is the Israeli government and ambassadors like yourself, how are you pushing back against this UN bias?
So the UN, the different multilateral arena has been very biased, I have to say. There are numerous resolutions that the Arab group is always pushing against us. And we don't have the numbers many times, unfortunately. And I have to say, this is, they took it for granted that we will not be able to pass it. And I was I was supported by many of our colleagues, by many of our allies. Not all, I have to say. There are some Europeans that unfortunately even abstained on this moral amendment calling for the release of the hostages, like Ireland, like Slovenia, like Norway and Belgium, which is very unfortunate, I have to say. But the majority of member states that were in the room understood, yes, this is a resolution that comes up every year and it denounces Israel, but they must support the reality. And the reality is that we have to call for the release of the hostages. And we need to recognize the fact that many of the hospitals and ambulances in Gaza are militarized by Hamas and the Islamic Jihad. So this was, you're asking how it is in the multilateral forum. It's a front. It's a difficult diplomatic front, I have to say. Always, even before October 7th. I've been in the multilateral world for many, many years. But we've managed over the years, in some cases, to build a coalition and to push back.
You know, we are running out of time, but I did want to ask you maybe to explain for those who don't know, the World Health Organization did also elevate the status of the Palestinian entity, Palestinian body, recognizing it as a state. Why is it problematic to see UN bodies like this pushing and promoting a Palestinian state right now, of all times, when there's an active war and hostages still in Gaza?
Well, it did alleviate their status. Didn't give them full membership, did not give them rights to vote, similar to what happened a couple of weeks ago in the General Assembly. But, you know, we believe that it's basically up to us and the Palestinians at the end of the day to push forward. And it cannot be forced on the side. It shouldn't be forced on the side. And I have to say, in my speech, what I said was that, you know, the fact that the Palestinian delegation, the Palestinian Authority can sit among member states doesn't mean that this is doesn't help the Palestinians in Gaza or in Ramallah. What will help the Palestinians is leadership. Leadership, actually, that will denounce terrorism. Leadership that will not educate children to hate us. That's what they need on the ground. So it's nice that the Palestinian delegation here in Geneva feels better and they can sit among all the member states. But the question is, what does it really do for them on the ground?
Absolutely.
And that they need to.
Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but I want to thank you so much, Ambassador Shachar, for taking the time to speak with us and for all the important work that you're doing in the United Nations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
An update on the debate over the ultra-Orthodox draft to the IDF, which has been raging for years. Currently, ultra-Orthodox Israelis do not have to serve in the IDF, a source of major tension in Israeli society, even more so in recent months due to the war in Gaza. In recent weeks, the government proposed an earlier version of a draft bill following the Supreme Court demands that the eligible men from the ultra-Orthodox community be drafted to the IDF immediately. Now, a 9-judge panel is reviewing the issue, examining petitions which call for the immediate draft without further delays or legislation. Until now, the Israeli government has sought to work around Supreme Court demands to cease funding to yeshivas until the ultra-Orthodox fulfill their legal obligations to serve the country, even seeking private counsel to work around the court and attorney general's legal opinions on the matter. Let's take a look at the weather forecast. Mostly clear skies are expected tonight around the country, with temperatures reaching lows of around 22 degrees Celsius or 71 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow, partly cloudy skies and excessive heat are expected around the country, as temperatures will reach highs of around 36 degrees Celsius or 96 degrees Fahrenheit. That's all for today's news. For more updates from Israel on all your devices, check out our ILTV channels, subscribe to our ILTV newsletter, and don't forget to check out our website, ILTV.tv, with all the latest news from the heart of the State of Israel. I'm Emily Schrader. Be well, and thank you so much for watching.